Why, hello there, and welcome to this video. Since Trump has taken office, I've been focusing my efforts on covering the slew of executive orders that Trump has signed, targeting the LGBTQ community as a whole and primarily transgender individuals. Now, I do think that this is important. I think we need to stay up to date and informed on what's going on because this stuff really does matter and it will have impacts on people's lives, negative impacts. It will hurt people. And for that reason, we need to know what's going on. We need to stay up to date. But at the same time, I have noticed that a lot of people are covering these horrible executive orders and they're covering the bad things that could happen due to these executive orders. There are not a lot of people covering the follow up and like talking about what's happening since these executive orders have been signed and like what kind of challenges have been levied against them. I've actually had people in my comment sections incorrectly believe that these are bills signed into law or that these things will go into effect with absolutely no challenge and there's nothing that we can do. It's just like the way things are now. But this is not true. He has only been able to do things using executive order because, to get something passed through the Senate, like a bill, he would need 60 votes in the Senate, and they're not going to get that kind of vote count with hateful legislation. And so he's really utilizing these executive orders, kind of like spreading them out so that they're not all happening at once. It's kind of like a steady stream of executive orders that seem to target individuals. And I think that the point of that is to make everyone afraid, to make everyone unsure of what the future is going to be like, unsure of what they can do to stop this, and to kind of just force people into complacency out of fear. But there are avenues of resistance. Not only could a future president rescind all of this bullcrap and just kind of put us back in a good place, not only that, but these are executive orders that can be challenged in court and blocked by judges. Not only that, but these executive orders also have to be enforced by people. Like there are people that have to hand down the directives for these executive orders. So like the one targeting school systems, for example, if you have people in positions of power that are, agreeable towards queer folk in general, they will likely put up a fight against this stuff. So what I wanted to do today is go over the resistance that we are seeing to these executive orders and sort of like the fallout from these executive orders, like what has taken effect, what hasn't taken effect, what's being challenged, what isn't being challenged, that kind of stuff. I want to give kind of an idea for people as to like how this stuff has shaken out, because I just am worried that a lot of people are hearing about these executive orders and they're thinking like, well, that's it for us. Like we're cooked. And we are in danger and these things will hurt people and there will be repercussions. But I just want to make it very clear that it's not as bad as Trump wants it to be. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first article. We have a bunch of articles to go over today, so I'm going to try to not spend too much time on each one. I'm going to try to move through them sort of in a timely manner. So first of all, I just want to go ahead and read this article right here. Trump's anti-trans effort is an agenda cornerstone with echoes in history. Hours after an Army helicopter and an American Airlines jet collided near Reagan National Airport last week, killing all on board both craft, social media erupted with the claim that the pilot manning the Black Hawk was a transgender service member, but it wasn't true. Joe Ellis, a transgender Black Hawk pilot with the Virginia National Guard, took to Facebook to post proof of life and to rebuke the false accusations about her. It is insulting to the families to try to tie this to some sort of political agenda, Ellis said in an online post. They don't deserve that. I don't deserve this. Ellis did not respond to an interview request from NPR, but her experience is just the latest in a pattern where Republican leaders and high-reach social media accounts scapegoat transgender people in the wake of high-profile tragedies. Similar false claims were made about perpetrators of mass shootings in Texas, Georgia, Wisconsin, and Iowa. For extremism experts and some within the trans community, the accusations speak to a highly dangerous political strategy to sow division and expand authoritarian control. The emergence of a political strategy. On Wednesday afternoon, President Trump signed the latest in a series of executive orders concerning transgender Americans, which aims to ban transgender women from participating in women's sports. In his comments before signing the order, Trump repeatedly referred to these athletes as men posing as women. He declared that the measure would effectively end an attack on female athletes at public K-12 schools and virtually all U.S. colleges and universities. Other initiatives of the current administration aim to curtail, among other things, trans people's access to bathrooms, medical care, and legal documents that reflect their gender identity. In his comments before signing the order on sports participation, Trump repeated the lie that 2024 Olympics gold medal women's boxer Imani Khalid Khalif is a man and asserted that transgender women beat and batter female athletes. Just to be extremely clear, and I apologize if I'm not saying her name right, but Amani Khalif, she's a woman. She's a cis woman. So this lie has been perpetuated to an extent where the president of the United States believes that she was a transgender athlete when she literally wasn't. So if you think that this stuff is literally only hurting the trans community or the LGBTQ community, you're wrong. Cis people get wrapped up in this stuff all the time. Transvestigations are things that hurt cisgender people. So I just want to make it very clear that this stuff is not just going to lash out at the trans community. It's also going to hurt other people as well. There's a ton of terrible claims saying that things like puberty blockers or hormone replacement therapy is somehow causing aggression or violence in transgender and gender nonconforming people, said Sarah Moore, a senior manager of news and research at GLAAD, which is an advocacy organization, which we know to be completely contrary to the medical science behind these treatments. Moore said that the mischaracterization of transgender people as dangerous to society also lies behind a now predictable response to national tragedies. Incorrect claims surfaced quickly after mass shootings in Uvalde, Texas, Appalachia, Georgia, Houston, Texas, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Lakewood, Texas, and Madison, Wisconsin, asserting that the perpetrators were transgender. Among those amplifying these incorrect narratives were Republican members of Congress. Another trans shooter tweeted Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia after the 2023 Philadelphia rampage, which left 5 people dead. In the aftermath of a mass shooting at a church in Lakewood, Texas in 2024, Senator Joshua Hawley of Missouri tweeted, "So the Lakewood church shooter was a transgender pro-Palestine radical." And in a tweet that was later deleted, Representative Paul Gosar of Arizona laid the blame for the 2022 killing of 19 students and 2 teachers at a Uvalde, Texas elementary school on a transsexual, leftist, illegal alien. In all of these cases, the claims were false. While there have been a few instances where mass shootings were committed by transgender or non-binary people, analyses have found these cases to be rare, and most mass shootings are carried out by cisgender men. In fact, Moore said that the data collected by GLAAD show that transgender people in the US are 4 times more likely to be the victims of crimes than the perpetrators. Nonetheless, unfounded characterizations of transgender people as terrorists, groomers, or mentally unwell have accelerated in recent years, as have state and federal policies aiming at restricting trans rights. What is happening here is that people are demonizing trans people in order to gain power and privilege, said Lauren Cannon, a teacher of philosophy at Cal Poly Humboldt. Cannon explored the past decade's growing anti-trans campaign for his book, The Politicization of Trans Identity, an analysis of backlash, scapegoating, and dog whistling from Obergefell to Bostock. Cannon, who is trans, said that it rarely matters whether anti-trans bills succeed or fail. Either way, he said, they appear to benefit the politicians who promote them. Where fear of trans people and demonization of trans people has been stoked, if a politician were to simply introduce anti-transgender legislation and it doesn't pass, they still have the bragging rights to say, "Listen, radical gender ideology is harming our nation in a variety of different ways. I'm your politician. I'm your person to fight back about that," Cannon said. In 2020, 85 trans-related bills were considered across the U.S., according to data collected by the Trans Legislation Tracker, an organization that monitors measures affecting the trans community. By 2024, that had grown to more than 670. According to Andrew Bales, founder of Trans Legislation Tracker, 15 of those had Democratic sponsors. The rest were brought by Republican legislators, often under the auspices of protecting women, children, or female athletes. This is part ultimately of a scapegoating effort that is really an authoritarian strategy to sow disinformation, to sow dissent, and to expand power, said Elizabeth Yates, program director of the Momentum team at Western States Center, a civil rights organization based in the Pacific Northwest. This is part of a larger project. Echoes in history. The intensity of the Trump administration's focus on one marginalized group is raising alarm among extremist experts who note that trans people make up less than 1% of adults in the U.S. It's ushering in a new era of efforts towards segregation in our society, said Hannah Stiverson, Associate Director of Democracy Protection at Human Rights First, a nonpartisan nonprofit organization. It's incredibly dangerous. Stiverson said the politicization of trans people has troubling historical precedent. One of the first trans health clinics in the world was in pre-World War II Germany. It was the Institute for Sexual Research in Berlin, she said. and it was one of the very first targets of the rising Nazi Party. Nazi youth ransacked the institute in May 1933 and burned tens of thousands of books from its library. It was used as an easy target to rally support to their political ideology and to escalate the forms of violence that society found acceptable, said Stuyvesant. What I see currently happening in the United States is the same strategy. Already, Yates said that corralling popular opinion against trans identities in the US has opened the door to other forms of bigotry. She pointed at efforts to ban books dealing with gender and sexuality from schools and public libraries. Over time, a much larger proportion of banned books were ones written by authors of color or featured characters of color. So I thought this was a pretty good article. I think that it does a good job of kind of showing you an overview of what's going on and talking about how this stuff has been done in the past, and it's being done again in an effort to try to gain power by making enemies out of us and discriminating against people. Now, I'm not going to read this whole article right here, but we're about to talk about the gender-affirming care ban for minors. And so I wanted to go ahead and highlight this right here. Fewer than 0.1% of U.S. adolescents receive gender-affirming medications, report find. As U.S. lawmakers debate issues around healthcare for transgender youth, it's been difficult to determine the number of young people receiving gender-affirming medications, leaving room for exaggerated and false claims. Now, a medical journal has published the most reliable estimate yet, and the numbers are low, reflecting more clearly on medical practices now being weighed by the U.S. Supreme Court. Fewer than 1 in 1,000 U.S. adolescents with commercial insurance received gender-affirming medications, puberty blockers, or hormones during a recent 5-year period, according to a study released Monday. At least 26 states have adopted laws restricting or banning gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors, and most of those states face lawsuits. A decision by the Supreme Court in a Tennessee case is expected later this year. President-elect Donald Trump has promised to roll back protections for transgender people. We are not seeing inappropriate use of this sort of care, said lead author Landon Hughes, a Harvard University public health researcher, and it's certainly not happening at the rate at which people think it is. The researchers analyzed a large insurance claims database covering more than 5 million patients ages 8 to 17. Only 926 adolescents with a gender-related diagnosis received puberty blockers from 2018 through 2022. That's through that entire period, only 926. During that time, 1,927 received hormones. The findings, published in JAMA Pediatrics, suggest that fewer than 0.1% of all youth in the database receive these medications. The researchers found that no patients under the age of 12 were prescribed hormones, an indication that doctors are appropriately cautious about when to start such treatments. So this article is really important because it shows us that the research is in, and this is not some massive social contagion. This is not something affecting millions of children across the US. This is something affecting under 1,000 or maybe slightly over 1,000 children, like in terms of medical treatments. Like this is something, they are focusing all this hate on such a small population of people. It's absurd. And I think that if the right-wing grifters were to honestly confront this stuff, it would make all of their arguments seem incredibly stupid. It's like when you do research on transgender athletes and you find out that in some of these states where they pass these bans, there are no transgender athletes. Like there are some states where they're passing these laws to ban trans athletes, and there's like one trans athlete in the entire state or something. And it's like, why are we spending our effort focusing on this when there are real things that need to be fixed? Like our country has real problems. So focusing all this energy on targeting such a minority of people is absurd. It's a distraction from the more important issues. Okay, so now we're gonna focus on resistance and like what's happening to try to fight back against these executive orders. So here we are, families sue to block Trump's executive order barring gender-affirming care. Trump cannot withhold federal funds that have been previously authorized by Congress, the lawsuit states. 7 families of transgender children are suing to block President Donald Trump's executive order barring healthcare facilities from providing gender-affirming care to trans youth, claiming the order is unconstitutionally trying to block funds already allocated to those providers. The lawsuit was filed on Tuesday in a federal court in Baltimore, Maryland. The families are being represented by the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, Lambda Legal, PFLAG, and GLMA. The suit alleges that Trump's recent executive order, which seeks to withhold federal funds to health centers that provide gender-affirming care to patients under the age of 19, is unlawfully limiting funds to those centers. The president does not have unilateral power to withhold federal funds that have been previously authorized by Congress Congress and signed into law, and the president does not have the power to impose his own conditions on the use of funds when Congress has not delegated to him the power to do so, the lawsuit states. Trump's executive order has had concrete and immediate effects, including care centers across the country ending the provision of ongoing and essential gender-affirming medical care to transgender patients. Decades of clinical research and large bodies of scientific and medical literature support the ongoing treatment of trans patients listed in the lawsuit, the brief contends, noting that if they are left untreated, it could have serious consequences for the health and well-being of transgender people, including adolescents. President Trump has shown a clear determination to use every lever of government to drive transgender people out of public life, said Joshua Block, senior counsel for the ACLU's LGBT and HIV project. Trump's executive order lays out a clear plan to shut down access to life-saving medical care for transgender youth nationwide, overriding the role of families and putting politics between patients and their doctors. We will not allow this dangerous, sweeping, and unconstitutional order to stand. Brian K. Bond, chief executive officer of PFLAG National, agreed. President Trump and other politicians maliciously harm our families by denying them access to physician-prescribed, medically recommended care, Bond said. This order puts trans and non-binary young people and their families at risk, and we're not putting up with it. Kristen Chapman, a parent of a 17-year-old transgender girl named Willow, who is included in the lawsuit, recounted how her family had moved from Tennessee to Virginia after Tennessee had passed legislation barring gender-affirming care for children. Trump's executive order made that move all the more heartbreaking as Willow recently had an appointment at Virginia Commonwealth University Medical Center canceled. I tried for months to get an appointment at VCU, and I finally got an appointment for January 29th, 2025, Chapman said. The day before our appointment, President Trump signed the executive order at issue in this case. The next day, just a few hours before the appointment, VCU told us they would not be able to provide Willow with care. I thought Virginia would be a safe place for me and my daughter. Instead, I am heartbroken, tired, and scared. Trump's order cited errant claims regarding gender-affirming care, falsely stating that it maims and sterilizes children, and wrongly insinuating that there is a high rate of regret among those who receive such treatments. In fact, regret rates are incredibly low, and gender-affirming care for trans youth is endorsed by dozens of health organizations, which have noted that such treatment is often life-saving for those who receive it. In addition to the lawsuit filed by these 7 families, there have been demonstrations at hospitals that have canceled appointments for trans youth, including at the University of Virginia Health in Charlottesville, Washington, D.C.'s Children's National Hospital, and New York University Langone in New York City, per reporting from Aaron Reed. So I think that this lawsuit and this effort to try to fight back against this executive order is really important. Like, I mean, obviously it's all important, but specifically the executive order that bans gender-affirming care for minors has a lot of broad-reaching implications that could affect very many adults as well. And it's horribly unconstitutional. Like, these discussions should be happening between doctors and their patients and the parents. Like, these conversations should not include the executive branch. Donald Trump should not have a say in what a doctor decides is medically necessary or not. Next up, we have See You in Court civil rights group challenged Trump's trans military ban. Transgender Captain Jennifer Sims displays her U.S. Army uniform. Slay. President Donald Trump signed a handful of executive orders Monday, reshaping the U.S. military to fit his MAGA values. One in particular revives his old quarrel with transgender military personnel. While he tried to ban transgender military members during his first term, Trump is taking a different approach this time around by targeting trans members under the guise of troop readiness. Per the executive order, the military has been afflicted with radical gender ideology, which is an indirect way of referring to transgender people without actually ever using the word transgender. It goes on to state that expressing a false gender identity divergent from an individual's sex cannot satisfy the rigorous standards necessary for military service. The language of the order gives power to the highly controversial Secretary of State, Pete Hegseth, to determine who falls into the category of someone who is ready or not ready for war. Given Hegseth's shiny record of bashing women and transgender people in military roles, it's likely he will have no problem following in Trump's transphobic footsteps. The Human Rights Campaign and Lambda Legal are already gearing up to sue the Trump administration for the cruel and dangerous order. See you in court, the two groups wrote in a collaborative Instagram post. While Trump's team claims that those with radical gender ideology are a concern for troop readiness, Lambda Legal says otherwise. The executive order will harm readiness because it will remove service members that the military has invested in millions of dollars in training, Lambda Legal Counsel and non-binary and transgender rights project director Sasha Burchert told Daily Kos. Thousands of transgender troops are combat tested, having been deployed to war zones and executed missions with distinction, many of whom are senior personnel with decades of experience. It will hurt unit cohesion because it will discriminate against otherwise qualified service members, sending the message that identity rather than merit is what is important and that some discrimination is acceptable. Historically, transgender people had to serve in the military secretly until President Barack Obama removed a ban, effectively allowing transgender people to serve openly. Trump reinstated the ban in his first term, but it mostly stayed tied up in the court until it was overturned by President Joe Biden. So this is another really important executive order. Like, clearly this is just discriminatory and it's awful, but there are a lot of good points to make against the executive order in terms of, like, these people have been tested by their service. Like, these people are ready to serve because they have already been serving and they've been doing great jobs. There's a lot of people in senior positions and stuff like that. Like, this is going to affect the entire military because it's going to remove effective people from their positions. So I really do hope that this lawsuit is effective. So here's more of a local story, but I wanted to kind of go over this because it gives you an idea of what can happen at a local level to try to fight back against this stuff. Washington Superintendent Reichdahl says he's working with AG on response to Trump's transgender ban. Washington School Superintendent says the state isn't backing down from protecting transgender students. The announcement from Superintendent Chris Reichdahl referenced Trump's February 5th executive order that bars transgender girls from competing in girls' sports. This, Reichdahl said, amounts to another federal attempt to usurp the authority of local school districts and states. Reichdahl said in a February 6 news release that Trump is attempting to withhold federal funds from school districts that do not comply with these discriminatory actions. The Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction is working with the state attorney general's office on next steps for the state's school districts, according to the news release. Reichdahl further blasted Trump's order as unlawful. One thing is clear: the 47th president of the United States is disregarding the rule of law by attempting to unilaterally impose an attack on the specific student groups that anti-discrimination laws aim to protect. Reichdahl slammed Trump's order as contradicting Washington's law against discrimination, as well as anti-discrimination laws for public schools. Discrimination based on gender identity is barred under state law, and Washington won't back down. Washington state will do everything in our power to defend the rule of law, states' rights to establish education policy, and to protect the beautiful diversity of our 1.1 million students and educators. We believe in inclusion over discrimination and love over hate. I think that's a really powerful message. I think this guy is doing a great job with his messaging, and I really wish them luck in resisting this executive order. Like, I really do. I think that stuff like this is going to make a huge difference for the future of our community. And this really goes to show why it's important that we, have outreach and try to reach more allies and try to bring more people on our side, because it doesn't matter if Trump is a hateful bigot if everyone else stands up to him and shouts him down. So next up, we have some more good news. Women win court ruling blocking Trump's order to house trans women in men's prisons. Trump's transphobic order is now blocked nationwide thanks to 3 trans inmates and an LGBTQ advocacy organization. A district judge has blocked President Donald Trump's executive order to forcibly detransition and house transgender female inmates in male jails and prisons, calling Trump's order a violation of 8th Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment. The judge's order is the second recent legal ruling in favor of trans inmates who oppose Trump's order, and it applies to all trans inmates nationwide. U.S. District Judge Royce Lamberth, an appointee of former President Ronald Reagan, issued his temporary restraining order against Trump's order after hearing a lawsuit brought by 3 trans female inmates who were told that they'd be transferred to a male detainment facility as a result of Trump's order. The women argued that they were likely to suffer irreparable harm under Trump's order, pointing to various government reports and regulations showing that trans inmates experience significantly elevated risks of physical and sexual violence compared to other inmates when housed with people of the opposite gender. The inmates argued that placement in a male penitentiary would exacerbate their gender dysphoria because they would be subject to searches by male correctional officers, made to shower with men, referred to as men, and forced to dress as men. The inmates also provided an affidavit from a physician explaining the numerous and severe symptoms that they could experience once the BOP discontinues providing medical treatment for their gender dysphoria. Lamberth noted that Trump's attorney general and the Bureau of Prisons didn't disagree with any of the harms that the trans women said they'd face under Trump's order. Nevertheless, the BOP argued that the judge's ruling was premature because the inmates had not yet completed the 4-step process to have their complaints addressed by prison officials, the warden, the BOP regional director, and then the BOP's general counsel. However, Lamberth wrote that an exception to this process exists within the Prison Litigation Reform Act of 1996. The act allows inmates to seek relief from courts before completing the four-step process if the process is likely to be a dead end with no way to address their concern. In this case, the trans women were unlikely to have their concerns addressed by the BOP because Trump's executive order requires the BOP to detransition women and transfer them to a male prison facility without exception. Alternately, the BOP tried to say that the women lacked standing to sue because the BOP had not yet explained the women's new detainment situation, like whether they'd be housed in high or low security facilities or in segregated housing, or what their new medical care would look like under Trump's order. But the judge wrote once again that Trump's executive order requires the BOP to stop providing gender-affirming care and to house the women in a male facility. This, Lamberth wrote, is enough to show that the women's concerns are legitimate. Lamberth also wrote that Trump and the BOP's worries about the negative effect the women might have on other women in women's prisons are abstract, like whether their presence threatens other female inmates or prison workers' safety, security, and privacy, compared to the very real harms of the trans women will face if housed with men. Lamberth's ruling marks the second recent legal ruling against Trump's transphobic prison order. The first ruling, however, only applied to the lone trans female inmate who filed the challenge. Justice Department Attorney John Robinson said that the government data indicates that only 16 of the 1,506 trans female inmates currently in BOP custody are housed in women facilities. So this judge was pretty based. Not gonna lie, this is a pretty based decision by the judge. I wish that we could transfer all transgender female inmates to female prisons, to like women's prisons. It's really sad to see that statistic at the bottom there that like most trans women inmates are in male prisons already. Like that's really sad. Hopefully something can be done about that in the future. But for now, at least this judge has ruled that they're not allowed to transfer any trans women that are in women's prisons to male prisons. Next up, we have another local story here. Teacher to school district. Not today, bigots. Sues over book banning policy. When I was in my 20s, I did not see a future where marriage equality would be legal. I did not think I would ever have legal recognition of my relationship with my wife. When we had a child together in 2009, I was not especially hopeful that I would ever be his legal parent. But both of these things happened when the US Supreme Court ruled in favor of marriage equality in 2015. Granted, today's court is openly hostile to LGBTQ rights, and that's scary. There's no reason to believe that they won't overturn Obergefell versus Hodge, which made marriage equality the law of the land. It's not like the radical conservatives who have been fighting against LGBTQ plus rights suddenly stopped in 2015. In fact, they've actually gained more power in the government and in our courts. Also scary. I'm reminded of the oft-quoted piece of wisdom from Fred Rogers. When I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, "Look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." Granted, that advice is intended for children who cannot be helpers themselves in such situations, but I am reminded of the many people over the course of history who have fought in one way or another against oppression and for progress. A lot of people had to sacrifice a hell of a lot to advance LGBTQ plus rights. I get it. Being told to keep fighting is exhausting, but I think it's still important to look for the people who are helping, who are looking at discriminatory laws and hateful rhetoric and saying, nope. One such person is Ohio elementary school teacher Karen Cahall, who has a 30-year career in New Richmond Exempted Village School District. Cahall, like many elementary school teachers, has a lot of books in her classroom, and 4 of those books contain LGBTQ plus characters in the plotline. A parent complained, and her school district suspended her for 3 days without pay. So Cahall is suing. The 4 books, reports The Advocate, are Anna on the Edge by A.J. Sass, The Fabulous Zed Watson by Basil Sylvester, Hazel Bly and the Deep Blue Sea by Ashley Herring Blake, and Too Bright to See by Kyle Lukoff. The books have LGBTQ plus characters in them, but do not otherwise advocate for or against any particular lifestyle or endorse an LGBTQ plus lifestyle, reads the lawsuit, which was filed December 2nd. I should note that I take issue with the term lifestyle here, as it has long been used to reduce LGBTQ people to a way of living that one adopts rather than an inherent identity, e.g. vegetarianism. None of these books can fairly be considered obscene, offensive, or appealing to prurient interests, the suit continues. None of these books describe sexual conduct or sexual activity. Each of these books has serious literary, artistic, political, and scientific value. These books each deal with characters who are LGBTQ+, and are coming to terms with feeling different and excluded simply because they are LGBTQ+, and serve to reinforce plaintiff Karen Cahall's sincerely held moral and religious beliefs that all children, including children who are LGBTQ+, or the children or parents who are LGBTQ+ deserve to be respected, accepted, and loved for who they are. Her lawsuit is challenging the school district's controversial issues policy, which, according to the lawsuit, vaguely and ambiguously defines a controversial issue as a topic on which opposing points of view have been promulgated by responsible opinion or likely to arouse both support and opposition by the community. A definition that is so vague and all-encompassing that it could extend to virtually any topic upon which any two random individuals or group of individuals might find something to disagree about. These kinds of policies, which exist to block topics related to LGBTQ+ people and the history existence of racism, are reactionary and do not actually protect children. If anything, they put children who are in minority groups in greater danger by positioning them as other whose lives aren't worth learning about and thus not worth considering. Cahal is taking a risk here, but doing the right thing in the face of opposition is rarely easy. So the next time you are feeling hopeless, look for the helpers like Karen Cahal and remember that there are good people in this world, even good Karens. So again, a really good example of someone in a red state who is doing what they can to stand up and fight for us. And so now I want to basically end the show by going over a couple articles discussing rallies and protests that are happening throughout the country. Federal workers, lawmakers protest nationwide over Trump administration agency cuts buyout deadline. Grassroots protests erupted Wednesday across the country while a new memo from the Office of Personnel Management pressured employees to accept the buyout and leave or face possible layoffs and furloughs. We are going line by line when it comes to the federal government's books, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said. This president and his team are making decisions across the board. Meanwhile, a judge scheduled a hearing Thursday afternoon over a lawsuit from a federal worker to block the scheme. Democratic lawmakers joined the protests, pushing back against the administration's first round of agency cuts, including a move to shut down the Independent Foreign Aid Department, USAID. Democratic senators also filibustered from Wednesday into Thursday, attempting to stall the confirmation of President Trump's budget nominee, Russell Vought, I don't know how to say it. So I wanted to say, actually, about that hearing, I'm pretty sure that hearing has happened and the judge has blocked this whole thing that's happening right now with the buyout program. It's kind of temporarily blocked that whole thing from happening. So that's good. So this will be the last article we read today. Thousands protest Trump policies across the U.S. Thousands of people on Wednesday turned out across the U.S. to protest Donald Trump's flurry of early actions, denouncing his plans for mass deportations, his attacks on diversity initiatives, and his efforts to restrict transgender rights. The demonstrations, which popped up in major cities and state capitals in more than a dozen states, appear to have been spurred online, with word spreading via hashtags such as Build the Resistance. They were loosely organized under an official tagline, 5501, to represent a goal of 50 protests in 50 states on one day, according to various websites and social media accounts. Most demonstrations began in the afternoon at Capitol buildings and at city halls. Those involved say that the movement is meant to protest Trump's early actions and Project 2025 as the conservative policy blueprint that Trump sought to distance himself from during the campaign. Many of his plans so far are aligned with Project 2025 proposals. The demonstrations gained momentum this week on social media platforms including Reddit, Instagram, TikTok, and X, the social media site owned by Elon Musk, the world's richest man and close advisor to Trump. Musk's own moves, leading a team that has aggressively pushed into the systems of a number of government agencies and attempted to shutter at least one wholesale, have also prompted protests. Carrie Reingans, a Democratic state representative in Michigan who spoke at the protests in Lansing, said people from across the state gathered at the state capitol in below freezing temperatures. She added that the protests came together over 48 hours and were organized by people who couldn't take it anymore. This was organized by people, for the protection of all people, Reingans said. There will be more actions. There will be more organizing. There will be more things for regular, everyday Americans to plug into. This is just the beginning. In Austin, Texas, demonstrators filled the lawn and walkway outside the state capitol, chanting and holding signs that read, "We the people reject Project 2025. On the East Coast, people gathered on the streets of Philadelphia and police stood watch at protests in Boston. People filled the steps and snowy walkways leading to the Minnesota Capitol and St. Paul, waving American and Mexican flags, as well as LGBTQ+ pride flag. Denver residents protested by foot and vehicle, waving signs and flags out of their car windows as they drove down Lincoln Street in Denver near the Colorado Capitol. Many protesters were criticizing both Trump and Musk. The demonstrations Wednesday came days after marches shut down the US 101 highway in Los Angeles for several hours, decrying Trump's plans for mass deportations. Whether the protests will amount to a sustained anti-Trump movement is yet to be seen. In the weeks following the election, Democrats were not able to come together under a single message as they did after the 2016 election when Trump won the first time. Even the grassroots efforts that once organized large national marches and protests after Trump's first inauguration have struggled to unite again. So those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about today. And I wanted to highlight something here at the end here. And the thing I wanted to highlight is that the Democratic politicians are doing an absolutely terrible job of standing up to Trump, of creating resistance movements, of telling people what's going on even. Like, I feel like the Democratic Party is still in this like reeling state where there's no real leadership. People don't know who to listen to. They don't know what direction to go in. They're not sure what kind of messaging to use. They're just sort of really unsure of how to fight against authoritarianism. I find this disgusting and deplorable. I find this really disturbing. I think that it's absolutely unbelievable that this party has had this long to prepare for a potential second Trump term, and they just don't seem ready. They just don't seem to have any idea of what they're supposed to be doing and how they're supposed to be fighting back. I think the only exception that I'm seeing is like AOC and Bernie Sanders. Like, those two have made content online. They are talking to people. They are telling people what they can do to try to stand up against this administration, and they're trying to organize people with messaging and stuff like that. Like, I'm seeing that happen from two politicians, one of which is a Democrat and one is an independent, right? And it's really frustrating to hear. Like, I'm not even going to show you, but you can look up videos of Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer talking to the public and giving like little addresses and stuff, and they sound like they're just reading off of a script that was written for them. There's no emotion. There's no fight. They don't seem to care at all. Like, a lot of the Democratic leadership is just completely besides themselves. Like, they're just like, oh, well, oh, another Trump term. What are we going to do? Who knows? I guess we'll just, keep going or whatever. We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. But thankfully, we do not need to rely on the Democratic Party to fight for us. We can take this stuff to court. We can fight this stuff in court, and we can try to fight this stuff on the streets as well. Public pressure will have an effect. Now, that being said, I do think that we should be contacting our representatives and telling them, like, what are you doing? Like, please do something. We should be putting pressure on our representatives to actually stand up for us, because that's why we put them into positions of power, to do something to fight for us. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like the Democratic leadership is really flailing. They are completely ineffective, and it's sad. It's just really sad. Like, how did they have 4 years of Trump saying, I'm going to run, and outlining all of the stuff that he wanted to do, and yet they are just completely unprepared? Like, Project 2025 has been out there for a long time, and what do you mean you're not ready for it? He literally outlined his plan with Project 2025 so long ago. You had so much time to try to set up things to be ready to fight against these things that he said he was going to do. So yeah, this whole video, the whole point of this video is to try to instill in you that it is not over, that there is still a fight to fight, and that there are people willing to stand up for us. I want to try to make it clear that just because he has signed his stupid little signature on some pieces of paper, it's not going to erase us. It's not going to prevent us from living our lives. And although it's going to hurt people and it's going to embolden bigots, like, there are still a lot of people in this country who have fight left in them and that are willing to stand up for us and stand up for what they believe is right, which is, civil rights. Like, civil rights are something that a lot of people care about. So don't lose hope. Also, don't be complacent. Like, everyone can do something to try to fight back. I also wanted to take a little bit of time to parrot something that I heard AOC say, which I think is really important. And that is that it doesn't matter if what you're doing is a real small action or not. Like, there are a lot of people who are probably feeling like they are powerless. They're probably feeling like, hey, I can't, create a lawsuit to fight these executive orders. I can't go out and do massive protests in Washington, D.C. Like, I don't have the time or the money for that. But that's not the only thing that we can do to resist. Sometimes what you can do to resist is a small action. But if you think about it, we have millions of people on our side, if we all do something small, then it will have a big effect. Like, reaching out to your representatives and letting them know how you feel about this and what you would like to see them do in the future to fight back against this stuff. Or do some local protests or organizing. Like, try to find groups that are active in your area that are doing what they can to bring people together to fight against this nonsense, and try to join in on that. Try to be a part of that. Even if it's just in some really small way, it can have an impact and have an effect on what's going on. So no action is too small. No resistance effort is too small. All of it is important. All of it is worthwhile. And I want to encourage people to keep thinking about what they can do to fight back. Obviously, this is what I'm doing to fight back. I'm making these videos. I'm trying to encourage people. I'm trying to bring people together. I'm trying to grow this community and this platform so that I can continue to fight for my rights and the rights of everyone in our community. Another thing that I do is I run a Discord, which the link is in the description of the video. You just open the description of the video, the link tree, you click their link tree, it'll open up, and then the Discord link is there. You can follow through and join the Discord. There are over 1,000 people in this Discord, and we are there to try to build community and support networks to try to be there for each other. So there are a lot of people in there who are, just as scared as you and I, and they are trying to build support networks, meet people in their state, meet people that are out of their state, just trying to find people who are in a similar situation that are trying to also figure out what to do and move forward. There are a lot of great people in there who are definitely trying to have each other's backs. And I really cannot recommend enough finding community in these trying times. It's so important. If you got to the end of this video, first of all, thank you very much. That's really commendable. I know that my videos can often be very long, and I do my best to try to get through the content in a timely fashion and to cover things in a timely fashion, but I'm also quite long-winded, and you know how it is. You know how it is if you've been around. So yeah, thank you for getting through the video, but also hit that like button, comment down below for the algorithm. Let me know, what are you planning to do to try to combat the Trump administration? What kind of resistance efforts are you thinking up? Also, if you have not already, please hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date with my content. Hit that bell notification if you want to be notified of every single video I do. I also do live streams on Sundays. So on Sundays, I do like a 2 to 3 hour live stream where we talk about politics, we talk about the news, we talk about what's going on, and we also play some video games or something like that. Try to just chill out, good vibes, that kind of thing. So if you're interested in that as well, I would love to see you in some of my live streams. They are very fun. I like to engage with the chat a lot and, get to know my community. Also, I wanted to mention that I do have a Patreon. The link is also in the description of the video. It's also in my link tree. Anyone that is willing to give anything to my Patreon is greatly appreciated. I have multiple tiers of membership, so you can give whatever you think is affordable for you, but it's helping me create a funding mechanism for my platform because my goal is to go full time. I would like to make enough money here on YouTube and with Patreon so that I can go full time with this and put more effort into providing more content, better content, more comprehensive content, all that stuff. I want to be here on a daily basis, like 5 days a week, providing you guys content and talking about this stuff. But unfortunately, I do have to work a full-time job for now. So unfortunately, all I can do in this environment right now is a video once a week and a stream. I would love to do more. I would love to put, more energy into this fight, but, this is just what I'm able to do for now. So the people that support my Patreon are the people that are creating the pathway for me to do this more often. They are the people who are helping me fund this platform, and I cannot thank you enough. There are going to be Patreon members popping up on the screen right now, and sincerely, it means the world to me that there are people willing to contribute to me to try to help me achieve this goal. I would love to do a lot more to fight for everybody in our community, and the Patreon is the path forward there. So the new super supporters that we have to shout out are Minty Mira, Jasmine Wilson, and Maddie. Thank you three so much for getting that top tier subscription. Seriously, when I opened up my Patreon and I saw that, it just hit real hard. It felt so incredible to see that support. So thank you. It really does mean a lot to me. The other super supporters are Tricia Pizafred, Katie Bug, Sarah J. Buck, Nikki Notzel, Sarah, and Sam Howard. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up this video. It is like almost 2 in the morning here, and I need to start editing this thing so I can get it out tomorrow. Well, technically today, but tomorrow, whatever. If you are in my Patreon, you will see this video pop up probably at like 5 in the morning or something like that. But everyone else will see it like at 11 or 12 or something like that, like noon, around noon, somewhere in that. But before I get out of here, I am going to do one last thing, and that is to ask just a little thing of you, just one little thing that I'd like to ask of you, and that is for you to drink some water.